why I understand and respect it, but I'm not excited for it anymore. I'm contemplating having to do a video reaction to why I'm not excited for it anymore. And you can blame one camera. Do you know the camera you can blame for why I'm not excited for the Red Komodo? Even though I wasn't going to buy it and it's not really in my price bracket, even in 2 years, is Sony A7S III. And that's the camera that has literally killed the excitement of the Red Komodo. And I'm gonna share my thoughts on it. It's gonna be very unpopular. And whoever in the film industry sees this video somehow, I'm sorry, man. I'm gonna be fair and as impartial as possible on there, but there's certain concerns I have with it that I just see as, yeah, you are paying for the red badge, which I think comes with its own status value. It does come with its own status value. So, you know, I'll try and pull up some specs here for what I have and we'll try and go through it. It's a good camera. It's actually a great camera in its own right. I love the fact that Red are making it more of an open standard, especially with the partnership that they're having with Canon. I like the fact that they're making it more accessible. I like the fact that the cost of entry, and I mean the total cost of entry, is not as daunting as it used to be. You know, and then obviously the form factor being the way it is, I respect it. But what Sony have been able to do, Sony have really created something that really eats into a lot of cinema cameras, dedicated cinema cameras. And just with the backup option of being able to take photos on the A7S III as well, makes it a nice touch. I'll try and make this as structurally quick as possible and really try and share my thoughts and opinions on it and be fair. I want to be fair to Red here. So I don't want to kill the vibe and say don't get it. It doesn't make any sense to get it. It makes sense to get it, but it makes even less sense to get it now, especially with what Sony have done with the A7S III. So what we know so far, and there are videos that are popping up. Even Marquez put a video out. You know, all the beta testers that are getting their custom ones. Yeah. So it is a super 35mm APS-C, pretty much 6K sensor. We don't know the full dimensions of it yet. It's small. It's a cube-shaped size device when it comes to the body itself. It's using what is known as a global shutter. And I don't want to get into the technicals of it yet, but a global shutter is a really advanced shutter that really allows a high-level sensor readout and a shutter speed readout that really captures the moment. And if you know anything about rolling shutter, that is one thing that plagues lower end cameras, right? We're talking about global shutter is something that really, if you look at here, spend a lot of time with the Red user focusing on the global shutter mode, and it's rightly so. This could be a huge step forward for the camera market. Red claims that the Komodo can switch between global shutter and rolling shutter modes. In addition to this, kid you not, no rolling shutter in fast-paced situation, pan whips and whatnot. It's a big deal. It's a big deal. So this is the first thing that sets it apart. One, but I've got a counter argument to it. Next is internal Red Code R3D RAW recording. And this one is huge because it looks like you can pretty much record internal 16-bit RAW. And anyone that knows, apart from Cinema DNG, RAW from Red with their Red Code R3D RAW codec, near enough is pretty much kind of like a gold standard next to Arri. It's a gold standard because it is a complete raw workflow. You can change all the parameters after recording. We're talking about, you know, color temperature, white balance, ice, like you can change everything. It records everything. There aren't weird limitations. So if you compare it to the other RAW formats, Blackmagic RAW still has some limitations regardless of how great and how well optimized that RAW format is, especially with the different compressions that you can actually record in. ProRes RAW does not allow you to change white balance. So ProRes RAW, in effect, even discovering all the limitations of it, is effectively more like a very souped up log profile that really allows you to have great shadow and highlight recovery, but you can't really do much else apart from that. So Red Code RAW internally, that's the next one. That is the next one. Canon's RF mount. So obviously this is very future compatible and future proof for all the RF lenses that are going to be coming out for the cinema series, as well as their full frame and the Super 35. And the RF mount is very adaptable to other mounts as well. So obviously you can go to EF, and they're recommending you use the EF adapter. And then obviously the great thing is that they do have like a EF to RF ND filter adapter that they can use. So that's something that is very clever for them to, and it's the first, even ahead of Canon themselves, it's the first cinema camera to have an RF mount. That's an interesting one. Even Red, Panasonic, I don't want to make this about you, yeah. Even Red are incorporating a first generation attempt of a face detection autofocus system. Like seriously. So this is another good look. This is another good look. Now, storage media, it's using CFast 2.0, so it's not using Red Minimags. Which, if you know about how expensive Red Minimags are, I'm telling you this now, Red Minimags are expensive. Just under a terabyte for Red Minimag, you're looking about close to £2,000, excluding VAT, as says here. Red Minimags are expensive, whereas 1 terabyte CFast 2.0, which is an open standard that's been around for a while, it's more than half the price, more than half of the price. So this is much more manageable when it comes to storage media. And you're using Canon BP batteries, 2 of them. Again, another open standard, and apparently there are affordable ways of having to actually change that BP battery slot into V-mount, which obviously V-mount is even better. And you've got an integrated touchscreen at the top to make it easier to go through and whatnot. And this is touted to be around somewhere around £6,000 to £7,000. Let's scroll down and let's look at some of the outputs when it comes to the Komodo specs. So this is what we have here. It's a 6K sensor, 6144 by 3240. It's using a global shutter. Full sensor readout will give you 6K at 40 frames a second, or you go into the widescreen 2.41 by 1 aspect ratio, and you can get up to 50 frames a second, 4K 60, 120 frames a second at 2K. It's got a 12G SDI serial digital interface, output that can do 2160p at 60 frames a second. It records R3D red code raw files internally, 3.5mm headphone jack and microphone jack, no XLR imports, CFast cards, not dual. That's another penalty that I wanted to get to. Wireless video module, and you've got the touchscreen display, face detection autofocus, Canon RF mount. That's the size. It's light and heavy. It's a cube shape. And if you're comparing the Komodo to the rest of the lineup, you're looking at, you know, the Monstro 8K VistaVision full frame, and that's a sports car for just the brain. And the Komodo, like I said, it's approximately around £6,000. Everything about this camera screams what I like the most. And what I mean about what I like the most from a camera is my favorite sensor size is super 35mm APS-C. Best middle ground, and I feel like that sensor size gives you so much control over performance and image quality and features. Performance, image quality, and features. And this speaks to me. Having face detection autofocus is great, right? Having full sensor readout, having high resolution such as 6K is great. I love all of these things. You have to value Red's color science. You have to value Red as a brand. You have to value having internal raw recording. You have to value these things to see the validity of here, because these are my concerns with it. My favorite sensor size, it's still a penalty of Super 35. And I'm going to compare it to the A7S III. The R3D files, the raw internal codec, you only get 2 options. You don't get all the different levels of compression from the other cameras. So that's going to be a very, very massive storage penalty for raw recording. When you shoot in RAW in all the other frame rates and all the other lower resolutions, like when you go down to 4K, 2K, it crops heavy. The reason why it crops heavy is that it needs to do a 1-to-1 exact horizontal and also vertical readout of the sensor size, right? So it's doing 1-to-1 readout, and it's not pixel binning, so that it's, you know, so it's just a 1-to-1 readout, and it's not oversampling because it takes a lot of processing power. But the fact that it can't do that, you're going to be stuck having to really shoot at those high resolutions all the time to get the full sensor readout. It does record internal ProRes, and I did a video on internal codecs versus ProRes. ProRes is amazing, but ProRes only caps out at 4K. You lose out on the 6K. That's another thing as well. So then what are you paying for not being able to utilize that full resolution sensor? As a camera that costs that much to not have dual media slots, miss me with that. I'm sorry. And as great as the global shutter is, but we compare it to the Sony A7S III. Full frames, 12 megapixels, low light beast, and it hasn't got any rolling shutter, and effectively you've got as good as dynamic range that you're gonna get. You've got dual card slots that support SD as well as the newest CF Express Type A slots as well. You've got great battery, you've got phenomenal class leading autofocus, and it's full frame, and you get all the shooting modes with a penalty of only a 1.1x crop, but practically you get a full sensor readout. So you've got a full working workflow in full frame 4K 24 frames, 25, 30, 60, and 128 frames. 120 frames a second. You get full high definition at 240 frames a second, all in a full near enough sensor readout. You can do external RAW recording up to 16-bit to ProRes RAW. And again, I do have to admit, ProRes RAW is nowhere near as robust as Red R3D, Red Code RAW files. So you have to value that. You have to value that because the cost of entry of a Sony A7S III with something like an Atomos Ninja V altogether will cost you way less with a lens than what you would buy the Red Komodo for. Body only, you're looking at 3,800. You buy something like a Sigma 24-7E, it's going to cost you 1,000. And then you buy the Atomos, that's going to give you RAW, that's another 600 with all the stuff that comes with it. You'll probably get slightly under the cost body only of the Red Komodo, and you've got a full working system that can shoot great movies, that can get RAW, and it's a lot more accessible as well. Yes, it's got a full SDI port, and SDI is a much more robust port as a serial digital interface than HDMI, but the Sony A7S III is the first of its generation to have a HDMI 2.0 port, and it's a full-size one. You're going to get near enough the same bandwidth capabilities to be able to tap into those high resolution, high bandwidth, high bit depths, high chroma subsampling, and raw recording. So, and also you've got the option to take pictures, and with great low light tape capabilities. I don't want to discredit what Red have done here. I appreciate the fact that they've gone for a much more accessible system, using the RF mount, moving to phase detection autofocus that they're going to develop, using BP batteries from Canon, which is not a proprietary system that's been there, using CF 2.0 cards that are not proprietary, and also doing things like using an advanced global shutter. And I don't want to downplay these things, but if the A7S III hadn't been announced, I kid you not, I'll be like, yo, Zcam are in trouble. And I think Zcam low-key are in trouble because the label that is Red will go way further. Shout out to Red. I think they've done something admirable to make their ecosystem and getting into the Red brand way more accessible than before, because when you bought a Red camera, it wasn't just about buying the brain or the body. You were gonna pay for the modularity of the handles, the screens and whatnot. And where my opinion is the way that screen is fixed at the top of the Red camera of the Komodo, you need a monitor. And my opinion is, if you're going to put a monitor on there, it's going to be the same form factor as you putting a monitor on the A7S III. And the A7S III, you put a monitor on there, boom, you've got an Atomos recorder that is also a monitor that can record RAW and ProRes, no different, you know. So that's my thoughts on it. That's my thoughts on it, and that's not me hating on the Komodo. I just think the A7S III in its own way has overshadowed it, even though I do understand what they've done. So that's my thoughts on it, man. Camera talk, and that's 3 topics done.